A second stretch goal in 1 month. I said these stretch goals would be controversial, didn't I? Today, we're going to talk about maybe the most controversial conflict of the modern age. A story millennia in the making, and one so big it's going to be a two-parter. Let's talk about the story of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Hi, I'm Tristan Johnson, and this is Step Back History. Be sure to click the subscribe button as well as the bell notification to never miss a new Step Back video or live stream. Periodizing the story of Israel and Palestine can be difficult. The ideas which led to Israel's founding have origins all the way back to the 2nd century CE, when the Romans pushed many Jews out of modern-day Israel, and they left in a diasporic movement to Europe, where they were constant subjects to violence and mistreatment. Century upon century, as Jews dispersed around Europe and developed into their own cultures, one dominant idea kept them together: the desire to return home. Though it was not until many centuries later this plan set into motion. In 1799, Napoleon offered Palestine to be a Jewish homeland, and by the late 19th century, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire for centuries, divided between several lords, and made up of primarily Arab Muslims. There was also a significant minority of Arab Christians, followers of an Islamic religious movement called the Druze people, and Jews. However, in the late 19th century, most Jews lived outside of Palestine. Jewish communities were concentrated in parts of Eastern and Central Europe, the Americas, the Mediterranean world, and other parts of the Middle East. Another thing coming to prominence in the late 19th century was a concept called nationalism. We've touched on this a few times on Step Back, mostly because of nationalism's incredible propensity for causing violence, displacement, and genocide. It's the concept every nation, what that term means is never fully explained, but that they should all live in their own homogeneous state and reject outsiders. Essential for this story is the movement spawned both Arab and Jewish nationalism, the latter typically referred to as Zionism. It's this idea we're going to begin with. In the 19th century, the wonders of nationalism led to an increase in repression and violence against Jewish communities, with Jewish pogroms in Russia and increasing anti-Semitism in Germany. With all this talk of nations, Jewish communities around Europe and the Middle East began to discuss resettlement of the Jewish people to their ancestral homeland seriously. Nationalism, breeding nationalism. This is going to end well. To many, this was seen as the solution to the growing anti-Semitism and repression of Jewish communities. This movement formalized in the year 1897 with the founding of the World Zionist Organization. They called for the building of a Jewish nation-state in Palestine. It promised a Jewish right to self-determination and would be a safe haven for Jews around the world. They didn't seem to think much about the people already living in the land said nation-state would be built. The World Zionist Organization began their plan by attempting to aid in the immigration of Jews to Palestine and the purchasing up of land in the area. The region still belonged to the Ottoman Empire and had its own Arab nationalist and Syrian nationalist movements picking up steam. Oh, and of course, there were still plenty who were loyal to their Turkish overlords. It was in this period you have the first acts of violence between Jewish and Arab communities. One of the first examples of this was the 1882 death of an Arab man named Safed at a wedding. He was shot by a guard for the new Jewish community, Rosh Pina. In retaliation, 200 Arabs threw stones at and vandalized that community. Over the next few years, the cycle of violent incidents and retribution began to escalate. Over time, this began to be more wrapped in the language of nationalism than just intercommunity conflict and theft. Palestinians began to see Zionism as the problem. The purchasing and dispossession of Palestinian Arabs from their land began to ring as an existential threat. It was here the Ottoman Empire stepped in. They clamped down on the purchasing of land to curb immigration. Many of the Jews moving to Palestine in this period were Russian, sworn enemies of the Ottomans, and they worried about more Russian influence in their territory. Similar concerns arose when the Ottomans lost their hold over the Balkans, so it's pretty much in line with Ottoman policy. By 1892, the Ottomans banned land sales to foreigners, By the time of the First World War, the Jewish population in Palestine was about 60,000, with a little over half being recent settlers. So this was the state of the geopolitics in the Middle East when the First World War broke out. The Ottoman Empire had a defense pact with Germany, and so once the war began, the Ottomans entered on the side of the Central Powers. In a brief moment of agreement, Jewish and Arab groups in Palestine decided to back the Entente powers, Britain, France, and Russia, to see Palestine freed from Ottoman control. You might remember this worked out well for the British. In 1915, through the McMahon-Hussein correspondence, came an agreement about Arab sovereignty. Lawrence of Arabia, y'all. And through this correspondence, there was an agreement to give the Arabs a state after the war in exchange for a massive Arab revolt against the Ottomans. 1 year later, the British got prospective control over what would become Israel in the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement. This gave the British the authority to handle what would be the fate of Palestine after the war. It also pretty much is responsible for a lot of the instability in the Middle East, but I think the Sykes-Picot Agreement could be its own video. The agreement made to push the Arab revolt was undermined just 2 years later with the famous or infamous 1917 Balfour Declaration. You might have heard of this before. It proposed Palestine was going to become the national home for the Jewish people, but they couldn't violate the rights of the non-Jews living there. That same year, the British defeated the Ottomans and occupied Palestine, where it would stay under control until after the war. In the 1919 peace agreement in Paris, the Ottoman Empire officially lost control of the Middle East. Things initially could be interpreted as cautiously optimistic. In 1919, the World Zionist Organization leader Chaim Weizmann made a deal with the future king of Iraq, Faisal I, and signed something called the Faisal-Weizmann Agreement for cooperation in the Middle East. In it, he agreed to accept the Balfour Declaration and let Palestine become a Jewish homeland. Faisal was the leader of the Arab nationalist movement, and the Palestinian Arabs didn't like this agreement. Many broke with the Arab nationalist movement over it, preferring Palestine become its own Arab state. The Allied Supreme Council met in 1920 to sort out this issue. It formalized Britain was going to manage Palestine, and it would enforce the Balfour Declaration. They invited both Zionist and Arab leaders to make a deal, but one was never drawn up. The next 2 years resulted in an attempt to carve out borders and decide which land would be a Jewish homeland and which would not. The British compromise was to make two states, one Arab, one Jewish, to honor both conflicting agreements they had made during the war. This included shrinking the overall size of Palestine, giving some to what would become Saudi Arabia. In 1946, a different chunk, the Transjordan, was granted independence as modern-day Jordan. This time sparked the first movements of a new Palestinian nationalism, formed in opposition to Zionism. Nationalism in reaction to nationalism, which is itself a reaction to nationalism. Such a great idea, nationalism. So great. Palestinian Arabs grew in their demands to make an independent Palestinian state. In the meantime, Jewish immigration expanded massively. Anti-Semitism was on the rise in the interwar period. I wonder why. In places like Germany. There was also another pogrom against the Jews in Ukraine during the Russian Revolution, leading to about 90,000 immigrants arriving in Palestine from 1919 to 1926. Once the Nazis came to power, this rate of immigration doubled. The same conflicts over land began to pop up again. Many of the newly arrived Jews moved into established Jewish communities, but the war caused a lot of absentee landlords. Many Jews bought up this land in what they saw as a perfectly fine and legal purchase. Arabs saw it, though, as Arab farmers being replaced with white European ones. They also took issue that these new landowners were refusing to sell or lease land to Arabs and wouldn't hire them for any jobs. The 20s saw an increase in tension between these groups. In 1920, the Palestinian movement got a new leader, Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Muhammad Amin al-Husseini. He tried to raise religious passions against the Jews by spreading a conspiracy theory that they planned to rebuild the Temple of Solomon on the site of the Dome on the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. To summarize what this means in way too simple terms, in Jerusalem there are a lot of holy sites for Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Many of those sites overlap. One such site is the place where the ancient Temple of Solomon existed. It was destroyed by the Romans, and on the site it was built upon now sits the Dome on the Rock. The Dome is one of the holiest sites in the Islamic faith, where they believe Muhammad began his night ride to heaven. So this place is still a tense location to this day. This tension began to sprout riots starting in about 1921. In response, the Jewish population founded the Haganah, a sort of Jewish paramilitary force. In 1929, a massive riot broke out leading to large-scale massacres. While Britain was distracted preparing for the Second World War, Arab nationalists tried to launch another major revolt between 1936 and 1939. This led to a lot of bloodshed. The British attempted to respond with a 1937 commission proposing a two-state solution, one state for Jews and another for Arabs. Neither side liked it, and the Arab leaders outright rejected it. They tried again with a different commission the next year, this time proposing no mass movement of Arabs, but it did result in an Arab state without any resources or the possibility of self-sufficiency, and it too fell apart. In 1939, to buy more time, the British placed limits on Jewish immigration to Palestine and on the Jewish purchase of Arab land. These restrictions held until the end of the Second World War. This led to waves of illegal immigration as Jewish communities tried to take in refugees escaping the Holocaust. During this revolt, ties began to build between the Arab leadership in Palestine and the Nazi movement in Germany. Nationalism. These connections turned into cooperation as the Second World War started in earnest. Germany promised to remove the Jewish presence in Palestine after they won the war. There was even a Palestinian Nazi joint military operation. The British didn't much appreciate this and began to more openly support the Jewish communities. Despite that support, Jewish paramilitary organizations unified into the Jewish resistance movement and began to commit terrorist attacks against the British, including a brutal bombing of a hotel by a Jewish radical group called the Irgun. Several hardline Jewish groups were active in this period, including the Stern Gang, which paradoxically tried to make an alliance with Germany against Britain during the war. This never went anywhere for obvious reasons, but both sides' hardliners were playing footsie with the Nazis. After the Second World War, Germany was defeated, and as details of the Holocaust came to light in the following months, much of the world started to support the Zionist cause. In 1947, the United Nations added to the ongoing tradition of getting a bunch of people together to decide what to do about Palestine. Their meeting resulted in new borders for two states with a tiny Jewish minority in the Arab state and a big Arab majority in the Jewish one. Jerusalem and Bethlehem would be under the control of the UN directly. The problem was neither the Jewish nor Arab state would be contiguous. Jews worried about losing Jerusalem. Arabs worried that this Jewish state had over 2/3 non-Jews, but was going to be ruled as a Jewish nation state. The idea went before the General Assembly and succeeded 33 to 13. The problem is most of those 13 states that opposed it were neighboring Arab countries. As soon as the plan was approved by the General Assembly, Arab fighters began to carry out attacks against Jewish communities. Fighting and riots continued for several days. Consulates that supported the plan were attacked. Bombs went off, Molotov cocktails were thrown, and a synagogue was burned to the ground. Jewish resistance fighters retaliated, attacking various Arab villages and communities. The violence grew out of control over the next few months, killing 1,000 people and injuring way more. A month later, this had doubled. Despite all the violence, one part of the plan still went into motion. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the existence of a new independent state of Israel. His words were surprisingly inclusive. He wanted to ensure complete equality and social, political rights to all of the inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It was going to guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture, and safeguard the holy places of all religions. It will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Israel was now a declared state amidst unending chaos. But will these lofty words of equality become any more than words? Find out in part 2. While I'm here, I made a Step Back subreddit a long time ago and would like to try to make a bit more of a community out of it. I'll put a link in the description, but I definitely want to hear from you about what an ideal Step Back subreddit would look like to you. I'd also like to thank these awesome patrons who support Step Back on Patreon. This video was a stretch goal on there, and the next one is on Iran. So if you want to see that video, go to patreon.com/stepbackhistory. The theme song is by 12 Tone, and come back soon for more Step Back.